Chapter 4 Jewel Noir 2 Detective Shelf Collection, DSC, Detective Library Classification 1. Religious Crime, Brainwashing, Illegal Doctrine, etc. 2. Political Crime, Terrorism, Domestic Conflict, Subversive Activities, etc. 3. White-collar crime, counterfeiting, embezzlement, breach of trust, etc. 4. Wildlife crime, environmental terrorism, poaching, illegal dumping, etc. 5. Cybercrime, unauthorized access, internet fraud, etc. 6. Public order crime, prostitution, gambling, etc. 7. Art crime, art theft, art forgery, etc. 8. Human rights abuses, coercion, false imprisonment, kidnapping, restriction of personal freedom, etc. 9. Homicide, felony murder, locked room murder, etc. 0. All/general. Specializes in all detective fields in that subject. Ego Amino, age 35. DSC 367. White collar crime, corporate espionage, rank 7. Shita Enby, age 28. DSC 245. Political crime, terrorism, rank 5. Ko Inuzuka, age 41. DSC 943. Homicide, locked room murder, rank 3. Kyoko Kirigiri, age 13. DSC 919. Homicide, impossible crime, rank 9. Yui Samideri, age 16. DSC 888. Human rights abuses, kidnapping, rank 8. Chapter 5 Murder at the Sirius Observatory 3. A game? This murder is a game? What do you mean by that? I asked Kirigiri as she sat on the armchair. There are still several things that need to be confirmed, she continued without answering my question. It would be faster if I investigated myself, but I don't suppose you would remove my handcuffs, would you? I can't do that, I said firmly. If you asked me how I felt, I didn't think she was the culprit, or to be more precise, I didn't want to think of her as the culprit. But from a logical perspective, no matter how I thought about it, the culprit couldn't be anyone but her. As a detective, I couldn't go against logic. If something needs to be investigated, then I'll go be your eyes and arms and legs instead. That should be fine, right? It's fine. What should I investigate first? Investigate the luggage of the people who were killed. Bring Amino and Inuzuka's bags, if you can. Their bags, huh? I went to Amino and Inuzuka's rooms as I was told, trying my best not to look at the bodies. I set down Amino's briefcase and Inuzuka's carry-on, next to each other in front of Kirigiri. The carry-on bag was so unusually heavy that I had broken a light sweat on my forehead. Good? Look inside Amino's briefcase. I opened Amino's briefcase and searched the contents. Inside were 2 files with writing that I couldn't really understand. 1 English conversation textbook, and then a handkerchief, cigarettes, lighter, wallet, and so on. Lastly, there was a side pocket with a black envelope inside. What's inside the envelope? Asked Kirigiri. The written request, right? I said, checking the contents. It's the same letter as the one they sent to me. The only difference is who it's addressed to. Anything else? Nope, nothing. I see. Kirigiri pressed her lips together, deep in thought. We should still investigate the others' bags, but for now, I'm willing to come to a conclusion. You figured something out? The second request, rather the challenge you received, appears to have been sent to you alone. Challenge? Oh, you mean this? The letter that started with a message for the detective. Not everyone got one of these? You didn't find one in Mr. Amino's luggage, did you? I didn't receive one either, said Kirigiri. I believe that you have been chosen to serve as the detective in this incident. I'm serving as the detective? Yes, Kirigiri said bluntly, an expression beyond her years on her face. As it indicates in the letter, you were given an advanced warning regarding this incident in the challenge you received. You were the detective asked to solve this case. Wait a minute. You mean if I had figured out this earlier? That this was supposed to be some sort of challenge? I could have stopped it before it even happened? Perhaps so. No way, that's... I let a murder happen right under my nose just because I didn't recognize the culprit's provocation? If I'd just been a bit more sharp. If I'd just been a little bit more cautious. If I'd just been a little bit more of a detective, then maybe I could have prevented this from happening. Maybe this wouldn't have ended with 3 people dead. 3 people, I had never met them before this, but those were still 3 lives that I let be extinguished. 3 detectives' lives even. 3 people who had been working to right wrongs in the world. My hands were shaking. It felt like I'd killed them myself. Thinking along those lines, some sense can be made of this inexplicable situation we find ourselves in currently. When I first awoke, my very first thought was, why wasn't I killed? I felt those words were the clearest demonstration of what a warped human being this little girl called Kyoko Kirigiri was. It was so easy for her to accept risking her life like it was the fact of everyday life and not an extraordinary circumstance. She lived with the presence of death constantly beside her. It even gave me a little chill just thinking about what might have happened to her to make her that way. The culprit has had countless opportunities to kill me, so why did they allow me to live? The reason is simple. I am serving as the culprit. So you are the... Don't misunderstand. By no means is it any more than a role that I've been assigned. You are given the part of the one who indicts the culprit. I was given the part of the one who is indicted. That is how things have been set up. So basically, you're a dummy culprit prepared by the real culprit? Yes. There's something fishy about that. I mean, there's something fishy about there being a challenge at all. Like, what does the culprit have to gain from sending a letter announcing their crime ahead of time? And you said I'm playing the detective? From the culprit's point of view, I don't see why they'd ever need a detective. That's why I believe this is a game. That doesn't make any sense. You're saying killing people is a game? Well, rather, it's a murder game wherein the culprit issues a challenge to the detective. That's the only thing I can think of, considering the existence of the written challenge and the reasoning behind leaving the 2 of us alive. The culprit just wanted to see our reactions? I wonder. So basically, this is what you're trying to say. Right now, this whole situation, this is a real-time mystery game that the culprit set up as a challenge for me? Yes. There's no way I'm gonna believe that. That's ridiculous, I denied. Why me? Out of 65,500 detectives, why would they single me out? Perhaps they wish to issue a challenge to all detectives, or alternatively, the very concept of private investigators. Kirigiri narrowed her eyes and shook her head, swishing her hair back from her cheeks. She looked like she was prepared to face the culprit's challenge head-on. Fine, I get it. For now, let's pretend everything that's happened right now is a game to the culprit. Then how am I supposed to solve the case? That still wouldn't change the fact that you're the only suspect. I'm going to speak based solely on my own personal perspective, but I am not the culprit, and neither are you. Your hand feels completely different than the culprit's. And so? Well, the culprit is another person. I have already rigorously investigated that option. We're the only ones here. No, you still have some gaps in your investigation. Is there anywhere that I haven't investigated yet? We all confirmed that there was no hidden rooms or secret passages before we lost consciousness. There was no traces of anyone exiting or entering the building in the surrounding snow. The front door and all the windows were locked from the inside. Even if, hypothetically, someone were to have a copy of the key to the door, there still wasn't any trace of anyone going in or out of the automatic door. So I could safely say that no one had gone in or out at all. If hypothetically, the culprit was someone other than Kirigiri, then where did they come from? And where did they disappear to? They didn't fly out through the automatic door on a balloon, did they? Maybe they shrunk to water bottle size so that they could hide in the fridge? Neither of those could possibly be true. There is something I would like to confirm before anything else. Kirigiri opened her mouth again to say, regarding the corpses, you told me about how they had all been decapitated. However, dismemberment is what was written on the challenge. You don't mean... Perhaps a more thorough investigation should be performed on the corpses. Were their heads not the only part severed? If you remove my handcuffs, I will perform the investigation, said Kirigiri. No, you sit there. I'll investigate. Be thorough about it. How were they cut? I'm sure the corpses will tell us everything we need to know. Got it. Also, I said, but there was no way I could investigate dismembered corpses and keep a level head. Probably the only people who can do that are the number 9 detectives. But I had to do it despite that. If it was true that I'd been slapped with a challenge, then I had to stand up and face it. I went to investigate the first corpse I had found. The one with Amino's head. By now, the stench of blood was hanging in the air throughout the whole room, and I felt the bile rising in my throat again. I covered my nose with my sleeves as I approached. The blanket had been pulled back enough to expose the cut between the head and the torso. I tried pulling back the blanket even further. The torso looked like it belonged to Enby. I remembered his black tank top. It had a muscular physique too, which led me to believe that it hadn't just been the clothes that were switched. The arms had been severed at the shoulder too. At a glance, they had looked like they were connected to the torso, but evidently they'd just been positioned with the cut edges placed right up against each other. And that wasn't all. Each arm was cut into 3 pieces. One section was the upper arm, from the shoulder to the elbow, one was the lower arm, from the elbow to the wrist, and one was the hand, from the wrist on. They were sure dismembered, alright. I took a step back, toppling down until I was sitting on the floor. There was no way I could be in my right mind looking at something like that. I suppressed the urge to scream, summoning my willpower to get back on my feet. If this atrocious crime had really been committed as a challenge to a detective, then I absolutely had to win. A detective has to fight for justice. I gripped my teeth and went back to surveying the corpse. Apparently, the different parts of the arm had come from different people too. The different sleeves and skin tones were arranged in an unmistakable, eerie mismatch. If it hadn't been for the fact that the bodies had been cut up wearing their clothes, I might not have been able to identify the owner of each part. The upper arms were probably Amino's, the lower arms were Enby's, and through process of elimination, the hands would be Inuzuka's. Each arm had its pieces lined up in a place, like some sort of puzzle. The horror show didn't stop there. Each leg had been cut into 3 pieces that had been swapped out too. The parts were arranged in the same order as the arms. All in all, the corpse had been cut up into a total of 14 pieces. I put my hand over my mouth, unsteadily making my way back into the main hall. Sitting in the armchair, Kirigiri looked cool and composed, as if she had already foreseen my reaction from the beginning. It's just like you said, I near sobbed. Why would this... If this really is a game, it's downright insane. What condition was the corpse in? Apparently Kirigiri cared more about dead bodies than she cared about me. I sank down to the floor, explaining the corpse I'd just seen. I see. It appears that this incident is even more cruel than I had assumed. Do you really think so? I asked, peering up at her face. What exactly is this? Why would they need to dismember people like this? If you refer to the challenge you received in the mail, Big Sis Yui, you can see that the dismemberment is related to some sort of trick. A trick? That leads me to think that the corpses were cut into pieces for some specific reason. A reason for dismembering the corpses? I can think of several possibilities, but most involve making them easier to carry. Carry? Easier to carry the bodies to the beds, maybe? It was true that carrying the bodies of full-grown men, each of whom weighed more than 60 kilograms, would be no easy task. But if they were cut up into little pieces, then transport would be a breeze. Go investigate the other bodies, directed Kirigiri. I had the strong desire to respond with, "You do it," but since I had promised to investigate things, I refrained. I went into the next room to investigate the body there. The head was Enby's and the torso looked like Inuzuka's. As expected, the body had been chopped up into 14 smaller pieces, and both arms and legs had been arranged in the order of Enby, then Inuzuka, then Amino, from the top to the bottom. What was more, the dog tag Enby had around his neck had fallen to the side of the body. I picked it up to inspect it. All it had on was his name, in the Roman alphabet. Now that I'd looked at the two mismatched corpses, there was no need to me to force myself through another disastrous scene to investigate the third, but there was nothing else to do right now but to see it for myself. I clung to the wall as I moved to the next room to investigate. The head was Inuzuka's and the torso was Amino's. Both arms and legs were, from the top down, Inuzuka's, Amino's, and then Enby's. I'd succeeded in investigating all three bodies, but other than confirming the dismemberment, I hadn't gleaned any new information. I didn't know how any of them had died. I couldn't perform an autopsy well enough to determine their estimated time of death either. Though they didn't look like they had been gushing out blood. The pool of blood mostly seemed to be just soiling the sheets reddish black, so maybe it's safe to consider them as having been cut up after they were already dead. It was probably safe to think of those pruning shears as the thing used to cut them too. Whether or not that was true. It was clear to see that the cutting had been done on top of the beds. I found several places where the sheets had been damaged as proof. I returned to the hall to give Kirigiri my report. My role had already been switched from being the detective to being the assistant to the armchair detective. I've grasped the situation, Kirigiri said calmly. It was more than a little unsettling to see her with this much composure, despite being 3 years younger than I was. There's just one more thing I'd like to confirm, she said, making it sound like a demand. What is it this time, little Miss Detective? Press that switch. She turned towards one of the walls. The switch to open the dome was there. Ah, that's right, I forgot to check that out. The roof. If the person who had brought us here was a 6th person yet to be introduced, then after they had killed the 3 detectives, they might have opened the dome and escaped through the roof. And they'd still be there hiding on the roof even now. I opened the cabinet on the wall and pushed the switch. With the whir of a motor, the concave mirrored roof began to open. All at once, wind and snow blew in. It was even darker than it should be for this time of night, but I could peer through the gap. Once it had been opened, I took my finger off the button. Can you investigate on top of the roof? Kirigiri asked, shivering as she took off the snow from her head. It's pretty high, I said, crossing my arms. But maybe I could make it, even if other people couldn't. I dragged the round table over from the middle of the room and put it up against the wall. Then I hopped up onto the table, shoes and all, aimed for the opening in the dome, which is the place where the wall ordinarily met the ceiling, and jumped. I made it! It had been close. My fingers were just barely hanging onto the top of the wall. This was the edge along which the dome slid open and closed, to the left and right. I pulled my body up and somehow managed to crawl up onto it. I'm surprised, Kirigiri sounded impressed. That was an amazingly powerful jump. Haha, these are my prized springing legs. I broke the vertical jump record for high school girls. It was painful, but I finally managed to get myself up into the roof's open edge. But unfortunately, my body's pretty weak overall. so I couldn't put these prize legs to work in any sports. If I ever managed to compete with them somehow, well, maybe I could just go to Hope's Peak Academy. Just kidding. I had chosen the path of the detective instead. However prized they may be, my legs had basically no impact on my detective skills. But for today, the first time, they come in handy. I strained my eyes through the snowy darkness to look around the area. But unfortunately, I couldn't see the culprit. I didn't even see any traces of anyone else crawling up onto the roof this way. I just saw the snow piled up on the roof, making the shape of the white star in the darkness. I sighed, my breath visible as a white cloud in the dark night, and jumped back down into the room. I hit the button to close the dome. I guess there really isn't anyone else here but us, I said, wiping snow off my uniform. So it seems, Kirigiri said with a nod. But what you did still helped. At least in the sense of affirming that there is no one on the roof. Yeah, thank God for that, I said sarcastically. If no one else is around, that makes you more and more suspicious. You're still saying that? Kirigiri asked, narrowing her eyes. Hasn't there been enough investigation by now? No one came in or out of the building except of us. 3 out of the 5 of us are dead. It was either me or you who killed them. No, all you've done is establish the situation. You haven't reasoned enough to take that situation to its logical conclusions yet, Kirigiri said, looking straight up at me. Her face was simultaneously that of an innocent little middle school girl, and also that of a detective who never once lost the trail. Let's sort through everything from the top piece by piece. If we do that, then I'm sure you'll see who the true culprit is, big sis. Kirigiri made herself comfy as she spoke, leaning back in the armchair. Wait a minute. You know who this true culprit or whatever is? I wonder, Kirigiri asked, a reserved, mysterious smile appearing on her lips. Now, let us continue the discussion and recall what has happened since the start of this incident. From the start? Yes. Starting with the question of when you and the others were given the sleeping pills. Ah, now that you mention it, fainting drugs is written on the challenge letter. No, the sleeping pills and fainting drugs are 2 different things. I believe the fainting drugs were what I inhaled from the handkerchief, but at some other time, you and the others unwittingly consumed sleeping pills. When exactly was that? I was so careful I didn't even touch anything that was in the fridge. Well, you drank a can of coffee in the van, didn't you? Oh! I suddenly cried out. The can of coffee I got before we left the station. Are you trying to say there was some slow-acting sleeping pills in there? Yes, I cannot think of anything else. So, that was it? Does that mean the driver's the culprit? No, the driver went back down the mountain. I find it hard to believe he would come back to covertly sneak into the building. You confirmed that no outsiders went in or out yourself, didn't you? I guess I did. The driver was acting under instructions from Yoshizono Oe. Giving you that can of coffee was part of those instructions. So the murder plot had already started by then. I was too careless. If only I had noticed back then maybe I would have stopped it from happening. I bit my lip. I believe the sleeping pills were portioned out so they were to take effect once we had reached the building. Though I don't know why they weren't mentioned in the challenge letter with the rest. You don't think they were all lumped together under fainting drugs? I wonder. Kirigiri cast her eyes downward pensive. In any case, all of us temporarily lost consciousness. It can be assumed that the dismemberment took place during that period of time. No doubt the murder proceeded as intended. Under those circumstances, there had to be some meaning behind the fact that Kirigiri and I were not killed. According to Kirigiri, that reason was apparently so that I could play the detective and so that she could play the culprit, but... After arriving here, we carried out a careful investigation of the indoors, Kirigiri said, looking around at it. As a result, we learned that there was no one else here but us. Not even Ryuichiro Kiba or Yoshizono Oe. Then after we regained consciousness, we investigated inside of the building again. Once again concluding that there was no outsider present. There is no trace of anyone exiting or entering. Do you have confidence in this testimony, Big Sis Yui? Of course. That was the conclusion of a careful investigation. The 5 of us were the only ones in the building. Right, no doubt about it, I nodded emphatically. The culprit arranged this situation so that you would make an error in your reasoning. There's no doubt about that much. It's inevitable that you would indict me as the culprit, isn't it? I can't think of anyone else. I see. Then allow me to refute that assumption, said Kirigiri, attempting to sound mature. I am not the culprit. The culprit is someone other than you or me. A culprit other than us? But you agreed that it was only 5 of us in here, didn't you? Yes. But you're still saying that the culprit is someone else? Also yes. You don't mean the culprit is one of the 3 dead people? I do. That's unthinkable. It's impossible, no matter how you think about it. Weren't they all dismembered? They couldn't possibly be playing dead. Or do you mean one of them committed suicide? The possibility disappeared when they all had their severed body parts rearranged. Someone other than the 3 dead people had to be there to rearrange the parts like some twisted puzzle. Yes. The question is, who? It wasn't me! I know. You should first consider the mystery of the dismembered corpses. Why were they severed into 14 distinct parts? And then why were those parts switched? How could I possibly understand something like that? Whatever the answer is, doesn't it boil down to some freak getting off on something messed up? Or are you saying that there's some logical reasoning behind dismembering them and reorganizing the parts? Yes, there is. No way! It just doesn't make sense. No, you'll soon understand it if you consider it with a level head. Level-headed? Level-headed? I'm pretty sure Kirigiri said that the bodies were dismembered to make them easier to carry. Maybe that applies in this case too. Carry them. But from where to where? Suddenly, I was struck by an idea. There's one simple answer that can resolve all these mysteries, isn't there? Kirigiri asked. If the culprit was one of the dead people, if he wasn't playing dead, and didn't commit suicide, he prepared a dead body double. How would he get a dead body double? He would have had to have carried it in from the outside. How? By cutting the body into pieces, of course. Are you saying that somebody brought a 6th person into the building as their body double, already in pieces? I can't think of any other option. But that couldn't be. I mean, we saw all the corpses' faces, right? The 3 dead people were the 3 detectives I met today. Without a doubt, the people who died were Amino, Enby, and Inuzuka. I'm saying that one of those people was a fake. The culprit killed one of the detectives in advance and dismembered him. Then he appeared before us looking the spitting image of that detective. A fake? There's just no way for that to be possible, is there? I mean, didn't everyone show us a photo ID? It shouldn't be possible to impersonate someone else that perfectly unless it's a detective who's a master of disguise. Or are you saying that that culprit was actually a detective too? But if he has to be a skilled disguise on top of that, that logic relies on things being very convenient. No, that's incorrect. The impersonation was much more simple than that. All he had to do was to travel to the detective library and select a detective who looked just like himself. Oh, right. He could manage it if it was a detective who already looked like him from the start. Since there were over 65,500 detectives registered in the detective library, it might not be difficult to find at least one of them who looks a whole lot like you. The culprit that killed the detective in advance then stole his detective library registration card, and then acted like he was that person in front of us. And then, on top of that, he dismembered the body, and then brought it here in a way we wouldn't notice. An uninvited 6th guest was with us the whole time. But even if it makes sense that the culprit dismembered the body to carry it, why would he arrange the body parts the way he did? I can barely imagine any reason there might be for that. No, the culprit had a pressing reason for doing so. A pressing reason? First of all, dismembering the bodies makes them more compact. You've already surmised as much, haven't you? More or less? Right. Secondly, there's the issue of livor mortis. When a person dies, their blood no longer circulates throughout their body, and thus it slowly settles down on one side of the body in accordance with gravity. As blood collects, the surface of the skin begins to look speckled or half-tone. Livor mortis becomes visually prominent the more time passes. Well, yeah, even I know that. But I never thought I would get a detailed explanation of it from a middle schooler. That number 9 of hers wasn't just for show. That kind of talk made me want to throw up. But she continued with a calm expression. The culprit killed one detective in advance to be his body double. Naturally, this happened before we were even gathered here. Therefore, that one corpse was significantly older than the others. If the culprit were to use that corpse as his body double without thinking, the livor mortis might betray that gap in the estimated times of death. Instead, the culprit drained the blood from the body. That task might have been easier to accomplish while the corpse was dismembered. If there's no blood in the body, livor mortis won't set in. Yes. In this way, livor mortis is unlikely to appear, yet as a result, a different problem arises. The bloodstains at the crime scenes. There would not be enough blood to make it appear as if the body had been killed where it was found. So, you think he maybe prepared one of those blood packs for transfusions? I piped up with a sudden thought. Or maybe he saved the blood after he drained it so he could use it for later? I was making myself feel gross with my own suggestions. I felt myself growing faint and clenched my teeth to make myself feel grounded. Oh no, that would be very unnecessary. There was a supply here of the blood he needed. Supply? The other victims? In any case, the culprit was planning on preparing 3 bodies, 1 in advance and 2 within the building. Naturally, he had to dismember the ones killed here too. It would be strange if only his substitute were in pieces. I see. He had to dismember the others too, so that he didn't expose which one was the substitute? I get that part, but why did he need to switch the parts around? If he had set the substitute on the bed without rearranging the parts, an unnatural situation would occur. That would be, as I previously referenced, the issue of the bloodstain. The substitute corpse, and only the substitute corpse, would clearly have bled less. The sheets would not be messy, and it would not look at all like he had been killed there. Ah, so because he mixed the parts from the bodies that actually had been killed there, he made it look like all 3 of them had been killed right there and then on the beds. Yes, once he did that, the blood seeping from the raw edges stained the sheets and eliminated the unnatural quality. I do believe that the culprit performed the dismemberment on all 3 beds. It would help make it more realistic that they had all been dismembered here. Yeah, it would. There were nicks in the sheets. I didn't even suspect it. And maybe the severed edges were pressed up against each other to hide the fact that there were parts mixed in there that weren't bloody themselves. So, have you managed to grasp the trick behind the dismembered corpses, Big Sis Yui? Yeah, somehow. I nodded weakly. From all the evidence and from what you've said, first the culprit dismembered the corpse that he would use as his substitute in order to transport it. In order to hide how that one had been killed a while before this incident, he drained the blood to avoid livor mortis. Then after all of us fell unconscious here in the Sirius Observatory, he killed the other 2 detectives and dismembered them. After that, to make sure we wouldn't discover that one of them was a substitute, he switched the parts around to resolve the issue of its unnatural appearance. I peered down at Kirigiri as if to ask, is that good enough? She gave a small nod in response. But we're still missing something quite crucial here. Where is the culprit? I looked around. Was the culprit holding his breath and listening in on our reasoning even now? There were no signs of anyone entering or leaving the building. Therefore, the culprit is still inside with us. Kirigiri sat up against the backrest, her posture becoming slightly more vigilant. Haven't we searched all over the building already? There was no culprit anywhere. Even I searched on top of the roof. If we consider where the culprit hid the body, it will naturally lead to our answer. The culprit took the body out of there, so it should have become empty. And now the culprit himself must be hiding there, right? I needn't say any more for you to understand, correct? Where the culprit hid the body. How did the culprit bring the body here into Sirius Observatory? Right, the culprit cut the substitute corpse up into small pieces and stored it in his bag. I just need to remember who had what bag. Amino had a briefcase, the kind that a salaryman might have. NB had a small Boston bag, and Inuzuka had a larger roller bag. I'd brought it out from Inuzuka's room into the hall earlier on Kirigiri's orders. I remembered it being awfully heavy. If the body had originally been inside of this roller bag, then the owner of the bag would be the culprit. The culprit is Ko Inuzuka. Or, no, more accurately, I guess it would be someone disguised as Inuzuka. He stuffed his body double in the carry-on bag, pretended to be Inuzuka himself, and acted innocent as he came with us together to the Sirius Observatory. If I think about it, then maybe his observations that he pretended were so insightful were actually just the results of his own prior research. And then, once he was done setting up the body parts, he hid inside of his own bag. Ah, I get it now. I'm sorry, Kirigiri, that I was so suspicious of you. You didn't deserve all of that. Oh, have I finally been cleared of suspicion? Yeah. The culprit's right here. I backed off a little so that I could get a running start. The culprit is you! Inuzuka! I gave the bag a dropkick, spectacularly sending it flying. I immediately followed up with the final blow, jumping on top of the overturned bag. Then, I put my hand on the closed zipper, and opened it. And then from the inside, Inuzuka did not appear. The bag was stuffed full of whiskey, vodka, and other various bottles of liquor. Huh? What the heck? Wasn't the culprit supposed to be lying in wait? What are you doing, big sis? Kirigiri watched me wide-eyed. No, well, I mean, didn't the culprit dismember the body double and bring himself here? So if you think about it, shouldn't the person with the biggest bag obviously be the culprit? Inuzuka, right? I mean, the other two definitely couldn't fit a whole body in their bags. What's going on? I couldn't think of any way that a body could be transported in a briefcase or an overnight Boston bag. I thought the carry-on bag was sure to be the winner. But there was nothing but alcohol inside. Actually, thinking back, I think even Inuzuka himself said that was what was inside there. Which means no one brought the body? I automatically turned to Kyoko Kirigiri with suspicion. What if all of her reasoning up until now was just a lie to try and deceive me? Oh, don't tell me you still think I'm the culprit, she said, seeing right through me. Well, wasn't all your reasoning all just nonsense? They dismembered the body to carry it. Who did, and how? If you're going to bring a whole body, you'd need a bag as big as this carry-on bag at the very least, right? But it turns out it was just alcohol in here. Nobody bought a body. My reasoning is not nonsense, Kirigiri said unflinchingly. First of all, look at the bag and think about it. Even if it would be possible to fit a dismembered corpse inside, do you think someone as large as Inuzuka would still be able to fit inside of it? Ah. Yeah, that actually wasn't going to happen. I believe those bottles of alcohol really were what Inuzuka brought with him. Then who brought the body double's corpse here? And how did they do it? Well, I believe the culprit simply drove it here. What? If it were even just earlier in the day, when the snow had not yet accumulated, driving here would have sufficed. Ah, I completely overlooked that. Perhaps the victim intended to be the body double was summoned for an earlier time. Then, he was killed and dismembered. However, I believe he was killed elsewhere. After all, there would be the possibility that traces of evidence would be left if a murder had been committed here, beforehand. If that were the case, then perhaps one of us detectives would have noticed. I see, but isn't there a hole in the theory that the culprit brought the body here just before we arrived? As soon as we got here, we went investigating just in case. There wasn't a body anywhere then, was there? The body was very skillfully hidden. Hidden? Hidden where? I mean, we scoured the whole place and there wasn't any body. Was it buried in the snow? There would be traces of that. The answer is simple. said Kirigiri shortly before continuing. However, before we discuss the truth, I'd like to ask you a favour. She looked up at me. What? I want you to believe that I am not the culprit. Her expression was unusually serious, and for the first time it looked almost pleading. Well, I mean, I do want to believe her. What if this is all one big lie of hers, though? What if I'm the last person she needs to kill to round out her crime? I can't believe her just out of sympathy alone. But as she'd been cutting away all this confusion with her logical reasoning, I'd already begun to half believe her. She had the talent as a detective. If you can trust me, then untie the ribbon on my right hand. Just the right's fine. What exactly is she planning on doing? I have no idea. But I'll believe in her, as a detective. I untied the restraints in her right hand. Thank you. For the first time, she flashed me an endearing smile. Or it felt like it, at least. Her expression had barely changed, so maybe it was just me imagining things. Now go get Amino's briefcase, Kirigiri requested. I did as I was told, picking up the document case from the floor and handing it over to her. She set it up on her lap. Now bring me Inuzuka's carry-on bag over here. Got it. I grabbed the kicked-over carry-on bag and rolled it up in front of the armchair. This okay, little Miss Detective? Yes, perfect. It looked like I had made her blush just a little. So, at the time we got all here, was the body actually hidden here somewhere? Yes, thinking back, there are places that no one investigated. It's not impossible. At that time, the thought of dismembered corpse hadn't even crossed our minds. Well, not quite. I had gotten the challenge, so I could have predicted it. I felt a wave of regret wash over me as I realised that. So where exactly was it? Inside the telescopes. Huh? Inside the telescopes? Yes, each of the 5 rooms had a 200mm aperture Newtonian reflecting telescope installed inside. If you understand how those are constructed, you should be able to see where the body was hidden. No way, that's impossible. There's no way you could put a body in those telescopes. Even if you could, we'd have found it right away. I mean, if someone looked in the telescope, they'd see right through the middle. Suddenly I remembered Inuzuka's lecture on reflecting telescopes. Inside the large tube, there's a concave mirror that reflects the image until it hits the object lens. Oh my god! No way! What if somebody had adjusted the concave mirror in the telescope beforehand? Couldn't they create a hidden compartment inside the tube? Do you understand now? A human head could fit inside a tube with a 200mm diameter. A man's head is 16 centimeters wide at most. With the 4 limbs cut up into 3 pieces each, I imagine they could also be stowed without taking too much space across. The head, the left arm, the left leg and the right leg. The culprit took these 5 body parts and distributed them between the 5 hidden compartments within the telescopes. There were bodies inside of those? But I even looked through one of those lenses. You shouldn't have gotten a clear image. With the concave mirror repositioned, it should have been out of focus. Yeah, I could barely see anything. Perhaps someone who was very knowledgeable about telescopes wouldn't notice the concave mirror was strangely positioned when they looked inside the tube, but there wasn't anyone among us who would notice that. Inuzuka seemed to have known a decent amount, but he didn't notice that key fact. Maybe he was working off memories that were too old, or maybe he just didn't have his head in the case. You didn't notice, Kirigiri? No, I only quickly glanced in the lens when I first came into the room. I thought it was probably just the lenses hadn't been adjusted properly. You know, that ability of yours, it wasn't working? I only hear the Reaper's footsteps when danger is imminent. So I guess it wouldn't work on somebody who's already dead. I sighed deeply. Wait, huh? But what about the torso? Where'd they hide that last part? You know, the biggest one. There aren't any more telescopes beside those 5. There is a certain location where the torso was hidden. And that is where the culprit is hiding now. Huh? The culprit? Yes. But I really don't think there's anywhere left for them to hide. Oh no, there's still somewhere else. said Kirigiri, sounding faintly amused. But consider this. This space is a small area that can barely fit someone's torso. For someone to be able to hide in there after removing the body part, they must be someone very short. I guess you're right, but there wasn't anyone that short that came along with us. You were the shortest one. No. In fact, I think there was someone even shorter than myself. No there wasn't. Well, I saw it clearly with my own 2 eyes. So who exactly were you looking at? Or better question, where are they hiding now? It'll be obvious who it is once I drag them out of here. Hurry up and tell me. Right, understood, said Kirigiri, extending her right hand and taking a bottle out of Inazuka's bag. She opened it, and then, for some incomprehensible reason, started pouring it out onto her skirt, around her thighs. The strong smell of alcohol permeated the air immediately. Huh? Wait, what are you doing? Her lower body was soaked with alcohol. Next, she took out the lighter from Amino's briefcase. Hey, wait, Kirigiri! This vodka is 96% alcohol by volume. I believe simply soaking fabric with it, as I have done, would allow it to very easily catch on fire. Kirigiri held the lighter in her right hand, expressionless. In my eyes, this was nothing short of insanity. What are you thinking? I'm starting a fire. Stop it! What reason could you possibly have to... If she flicked on the lighter, then the vaporized alcohol might ignite. If that happened, her alcohol-soaked clothes would probably go instantly up in flames. That wouldn't just leave her with a few burns, she might just burn to death. I didn't have the faintest idea of why she would do something like that. I'm dead serious. Indicting the culprit means putting your life on the line. That's what my grandfather taught me. Kirigiri, what are you saying? Stop it! And I have the resolve to sacrifice my own life in the pursuit of the truth, she said, her voice cold enough to send a shiver down my spine. In that moment, her eyes had already lost colour, as if she was staring down death itself. She placed her thumb on the wheel of the lighter. Stop! I will start a fire in 5 seconds. 5, 4... I approached her. All I could do now was kick her arm and try to send the lighter flying. 3, big sis, watch quietly. She barred me from coming any closer. 2... I stopped without even thinking. 1. I give up. Suddenly I heard a man's voice seemingly out of nowhere. I turned this way and that, looking in all directions. No one was there. Your reasoning was spot on. It's my loss. I'm pretty sure I can't talk my way out of this one anymore. Whose voice was that? Then get out of there, NB, said Kirigiri, standing up and facing the chair, her left hand still handcuffed to it. No way! Inside that little armchair? Finally, something began to stir, moving the chair. The back cushion became unfastened, and out came the tank-top-clad figure of NB. NB's imposter. How could that adult male body fit in such a small armchair? Was there a portal to another dimension behind that cushion? I had real suspicions, but then I got a good look at him. His legs were cut off partway through the thighs. The rest of them just wasn't there. I lost my legs in a fire a while back. They still hurt, even now. End of chapter 5.